Close your eyes, and you can still hear the whistle echoing across the Sad Hill Cemetery. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly didn't just make history. It created gods of the silver screen. But time is the one outlaw nobody can outrun. Today we bridge the gap between 1966 and the present day, uncovering the hidden lives and final moments of the cast. Grab your tissues, because this nostalgic trip down memory lane is an emotional roller coaster. Clint Eastwood as Blondie. Born on May 31, 1930 in San Francisco, California, the rugged actor first brought the enigmatic man with no name to life in Sergio Leone's earlier spaghetti westerns before starring in the legendary 1966 epic. At the age of 36, Eastwood's portrayal of Blondie became a massive cultural touchstone, introducing audiences to a cigar-chewing, poncho-wearing bounty hunter whose lethal precision and taciturn demeanor redefined the classic Western hero. His ultimate cool and moral ambiguity completely revolutionized the genre, establishing a cinematic icon whose style and swagger remain globally recognizable to this day. Despite the character's ruthless gunslinging nature and constant chain-smoking, Clint Eastwood was actually a lifelong non-smoker, highly health-conscious, and known for his quiet, reserved demeanor off-camera. He famously despised the foul taste of the cigars he was forced to chew during filming. This stark contrast highlighted his dedication, though his rise to fame was preceded by significant professional hurdles. Early in his career, he struggled to find work and was notoriously dropped from a Universal Pictures contract because executives claimed he had an overly prominent Adam's apple and spoke too slowly. Later, when his long-running television show Rawhide faced a sudden cancellation, he found himself at a professional crossroads. The immense success of his subsequent films ironically led to a prolonged struggle with being typecast as a violent, one-dimensional cowboy, pushing him to branch out into directing to escape the rigid mold Hollywood tried to force upon him. Clint Eastwood successfully transcended this early typecasting to become one of Hollywood's most acclaimed directors, producers, and actors, eventually winning multiple Academy Awards for critically revered films like Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby. Alongside his prolific film career, he lived a highly publicized personal life, having 8 children across various relationships and even serving a term as the mayor of Carmel-by-the-Sea, California in the late 1980s. He remained famously active in the film industry well into his 90s, directing and starring in projects like Cry Macho and Juror Number 2, long after most of his peers had retired. As of 2026, at the age of 95, he is still alive, celebrated as an enduring titan of cinema and a living legend whose sprawling 7-decade career has left an indelible mark on cinematic history. Lee Van Cleef as Angel Eyes. Born on January 9, 1925 in Somerville, New Jersey, the actor achieved massive international fame playing the ruthless mercenary in Sergio Leone's 1966 epic The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. At the age of 41, Van Cleef's portrayal of the cold-blooded, calculating killer representing the bad in the film's title became a cinematic touchstone. With his piercing gaze and hawk-like features, his performance defined the archetype of the spaghetti western villain, leaving an indelible mark on pop culture and cementing Angel Eyes as one of the most iconic and terrifying antagonists in film history. Despite a career built on playing menacing, sociopathic killers, Lee Van Cleef was known off-screen as a gentle, quiet, and introspective man, a stark contrast to his fearsome cinematic alter ego. His journey to stardom was fraught with significant professional and personal hardships. For over a decade in Hollywood, his career was marked by the struggle of being heavily typecast as a minor heavy, finding it difficult to break out of small, often uncredited villainous roles. The most severe blow came in 1958 when a devastating car accident shattered his knee. Doctors told him he would never ride a horse again. This led to a bleak period of career stagnation and battles with alcoholism, during which he struggled to find acting work and was forced to make a living as a freelance painter and carpenter before his career was ultimately resurrected in Europe. Following his European Renaissance, Van Cleef enjoyed a prolific later career as a leading man in numerous westerns and action films, notably starring in John Carpenter's cult classic Escape from New York and the 1984 television series The Master. In his personal life, he was married 3 times and raised 3 children. By the late 1980s, his health began to decline as he secretly battled throat cancer. Lee Van Cleef passed away at his home in Oxnard, California, on December 16, 1989, at the age of 64 from a fatal heart attack. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, where his gravestone fittingly honors his legendary cinematic legacy with the famous epitaph, "Best of the Bad." Eli Wallach as Tuco. Born on December 7, 1915 in Red Hook, Brooklyn, New York, the highly trained stage actor brought Tuco to life in Sergio Leone's legendary 1966 spaghetti western, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. At the age of 50, Wallach's portrayal of the fast-talking, treacherous, and endlessly greedy Mexican bandit became a cultural touchstone. His performance as the Ugly provided a perfect, darkly comedic counterbalance to the stoic tension of his co-stars, ultimately stealing the show and cementing the character as one of the most recognizable and beloved anti-heroes in cinematic history. Despite the character's manic, uneducated, and ruthlessly violent nature, Eli Wallach was a highly educated, soft-spoken Jewish family man with a master's degree in education, described by peers as the polar opposite of the rugged outlaws he portrayed. This contrast highlighted his immense versatility as a method actor. Professionally, Wallach faced the hardship of severe typecasting. Because of his undeniable success in westerns, he was frequently pigeonholed into playing ethnic villains, such as Mexican bandits or Italian mafiosos, despite his own heritage. This persistent typecasting made it difficult for him to secure conventional leading man roles in Hollywood, relegating him almost exclusively to character acting and leaving him fighting for parts that showcased the true wider breadth of his talents. Eli Wallach continued to work prolifically in television, film, and theater well into his 90s, sharing a legendary 66-year marriage with actress Ann Jackson, with whom he had 3 children. In his later years, he appeared in acclaimed films like The Godfather Part 3, The Holiday, and Wall Street Money Never Sleeps, eventually receiving an Academy Honorary Award in 2010 for his lifetime of indelible screen characters. Wallach passed away at his home in Manhattan on June 24, 2014, at the age of 98, from natural causes. His death marked the end of an era for American character acting, and in a fitting aftermath that honored his immense contributions to the stage, the marquees of Broadway theaters were dimmed in his memory shortly after his passing. Luigi Pistilli as Father Pablo Ramirez. Born on July 19, 1929 in Grosseto, Tuscany, Italy, the versatile actor first built a prestigious theatrical reputation before stepping into the dusty world of the spaghetti western. At the age of 36, Pistilli's portrayal of the righteous Catholic friar Father Pablo Ramirez became a pivotal emotional anchor in Sergio Leone's cinematic masterpiece. Providing a profound contrast to the film's pervasive greed, his powerful interactions with his on-screen bandit brother Tuco offered a rare glimpse of humanity and moral conflict that significantly elevated the cultural impact and narrative depth of the legendary 1966 film. Despite playing the steadfast, morally upright priest in his most famous international role and frequently embodying ruthless killers in others, Luigi Pistilli was in reality a highly sensitive and complex intellectual. This stark contrast defined much of his career. While he was celebrated as one of Italy's finest stage interpreters of Bertolt Brecht, his film career was severely hindered by intense typecasting. Relegated almost exclusively to playing morally ambiguous tough guys, cynical bandits, and violent antagonists in giallo thrillers, he struggled immensely to find diverse cinematic roles that matched his theatrical pedigree. This professional confinement, coupled with the harsh realities of the industry, exacerbated his personal demons and battles with depression. Luigi Pistilli continued to work extensively in Italian film, television, and theater throughout the following decades, often seeking refuge on the stage to escape his cinematic typecasting. Tragically, his personal struggles ultimately overwhelmed him. Pistilli passed away in Milan, Italy on April 21, 1996, at the age of 66 after dying by suicide by hanging. His devastating death occurred in his home just hours before he was scheduled to perform in a stage production of Terence Rattigan's Tosca. Attributed to profound depression following a recent romantic breakup, the heartbreaking aftermath of his death abruptly ended the life of a respected talent and left the European acting community mourning a profoundly tortured artist. Rada Rassimov as Maria. Born on May 7, 1938 in Trieste, Italy, the actress of Serbian descent first brought her dramatic talents to the screen in the early 1960s before stepping into Sergio Leone's legendary spaghetti western. At the age of 28, Rassimov's portrayal of Maria, a battered prostitute brutally interrogated by the ruthless Angel Eyes, became a haunting and memorable cinematic moment. Though her screen time was brief, her striking beauty and subtle sorrow conveyed deep emotional weight, offering a stark depiction of human vulnerability in a violent world that resonated powerfully with audiences and left an unforgettable mark on the good, the bad, and the ugly. Despite the vulnerable and severely victimized nature of her character, Rada Rassimov was a highly educated, cultured, and intensely strong-willed woman raised by a prominent family of academics alongside her brother fellow actor Ivan Rassimov. This contrast defined much of her experience on set. She was so fearless that during the filming of her brutal interrogation scene, she actively encouraged her co-star Lee Van Cleef to actually strike her for authenticity. Van Cleef steadfastly refused on principle, forcing the production to use a stunt double. Her career was also marked by the persistent struggle of being typecast within the Italian B-movie and genre cinema machine. She frequently found herself pigeonholed into playing tragic figures, witches, or mysterious women in giallo thrillers and horror films like Barren Blood. This limited her opportunities, making it difficult for her to secure diverse mainstream work and eventually prompting her to shift her focus toward television and producing. Rada Rassimov eventually stepped back from the relentless grind of acting, remaining fiercely private about her off-screen endeavors and family, while maintaining strong ties to her Serbian cultural heritage. She dedicated her later professional years to television miniseries and behind-the-scenes work as a producer before retiring entirely from the entertainment industry. At 87, she is alive and living a quiet, secluded life away from the public eye. Though she long ago left the cinematic spotlight, she remains highly regarded by cult film fans for her captivating presence during Europe's golden age of genre filmmaking, celebrated for the quiet, enduring power she brought to her brief but iconic role. Mario Brega as Corporal Wallace. Born Florestano Brega on March 25, 1923, in Rome, Italy, the imposing actor brought the brutish Union soldier to life in Sergio Leone's spaghetti western masterpiece, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. At the age of 43, Brega's portrayal of the vicious, hulking prison camp guard became deeply etched in the minds of moviegoers, helping to cement the film's gritty, uncompromising aesthetic. Corporal Wallace served as an unforgettable secondary antagonist whose brutal beatings of Tuco and eventual demise on a moving train perfectly underscored the violent, morally ambiguous world of the genre, leaving a lasting cultural footprint in cinema history. Despite the character's sadistic and ruthless nature, Mario Brega was a far cry from the terrifying heavy he portrayed on screen. Standing over 6 feet tall and weighing over 250 pounds, the former butcher actually possessed a warm, jovial personality and a tremendous sense of humor deeply rooted in working-class Roman culture. The contrast between his boisterous real-life demeanor and his menacing screen presence became a defining aspect of his career, but it also brought significant professional hardships. For years, Brega was strictly typecast by his immense physical size and gruff appearance, forcing him into a repetitive cycle of playing brutal thugs, henchmen, and villains. This severe pigeonholing made it incredibly difficult for him to find work outside of the Western and adventure genres once their popularity began to wane, leaving his immense comedic talents completely overlooked for a large portion of his early acting career. Mario Brega's later years allowed him to finally break free from his cinematic shackles and embrace his true comedic nature. In the 1980s, he achieved a late-career renaissance by collaborating with director Carlo Verdone, delighting audiences in successful Italian comedies like Un Sacco Bello and Borotalco, where he could freely utilize his natural charisma and native Roman dialect. He continued to act in Italian cinema until the early 1990s. Brega passed away at his apartment in the Marconi neighborhood of Rome on July 23, 1994, at the age of 71, after suffering a fatal heart attack. His sudden death prompted an immediate outpouring of heartfelt tributes from the Italian film community and media, and he was laid to rest at the monumental Verano Cemetery, forever remembered not just as a cinematic brute, but as a deeply beloved and versatile figure in European cinema. Al Mulock as the one-armed bounty hunter. Elam, born on June 30, 1926 in Toronto, Ontario. The classically trained actor first brought the character often referred to as Elam to life in Sergio Leone's 1966 masterpiece, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. At the age of 39, Mulock's portrayal of the vengeful one-armed bounty hunter left an indelible mark on cinematic history. He anchored one of the film's most famous sequences, the bathtub ambush, which famously concluded with Tuco Eli Wallach delivering the iconic line, "When you have to shoot, shoot, don't talk." Though his screen time was brief, Mulock's weathered features and menacing intensity perfectly encapsulated the amoral grit of the spaghetti western genre. Despite frequently being cast as rugged, unsavory villains and dusty gunmen, Al Mulock's real-life background was a stark contrast to his on-screen personas. He was born into an aristocratic Canadian family, the great-grandson of Sir William Mulock, a prominent jurist and former postmaster general. Far from a street-hardened cowboy, Mulock was a dedicated thespian who studied at the prestigious Actors Studio in New York under Lee Strasberg. He was a co-founder of the Red Barn Theatre in Toronto and later established a studio in London to teach method acting. However, his professional journey was fraught with hardship. He was frequently typecast in European cinema as a generic American heavy. Behind the scenes, his life was marred by a deep depression following the death of his wife from cervical cancer in 1967, and a debilitating struggle with drug addiction that eventually overshadowed his immense theatrical talent. Mulock's professional and personal demons tragically culminated during his reunion with Sergio Leone for the filming of Once Upon a Time in the West. On May 1, 1968, in Guadix, Spain, the 41-year-old actor committed suicide by jumping from the second-story window of his hotel room while still wearing his costume. He was reportedly suffering from severe withdrawal symptoms and profound despair. He survived the initial fall, but succumbed to a punctured lung during the bumpy transport to a hospital in Granada. The aftermath of his death remains one of the most chilling anecdotes in cinema history. As Mulock was being loaded into a car, Leone reportedly prioritized the film's schedule over the tragedy, demanding that the crew retrieve the actor's costume so a stand-in could complete his remaining scenes. Antonio Casale as Bill Carson. Born on May 17, 1932 in Rome, Italy, the Italian actor secured his place in cinematic history when he stepped into the unforgiving desert of Sergio Leone's 1966 epic The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. At the age of 34, Casale's portrayal of the dehydrated and dying outlaw Jackson, better known as Bill Carson, became a vital cultural touchstone in the spaghetti western genre. Though his screen time was relatively brief, his gritty performance was the driving force of the film's entire plot, as his character held the coveted secret to $200,000 in buried Confederate gold. The unforgettable scene cemented his status as an iconic figure in a masterpiece that is consistently ranked among the greatest films ever made. Despite playing a rugged, greedy, and treacherous outlaw on screen, Antonio Casale was an intensely private, humble, and quiet man in real life, standing in stark contrast to the explosive and cutthroat characters he brought to life. Embodying the high-stakes nature of spaghetti western criminals was a significant professional challenge for someone so reserved that his personal background remained almost entirely undocumented. His acting career was heavily marked by the struggle of being typecast as a supporting villain or henchman. As the 1970s progressed and the popularity of the spaghetti western craze rapidly faded, Casale faced genuine professional hardships. He found it increasingly difficult to secure work in a shifting cinematic landscape, relegated to minor roles in lesser-known Italian crime films before the lack of steady opportunities forced his eventual retirement from the screen. Following his departure from acting in the late 1970s, Antonio Casale lived a highly secluded life away from the public eye. Though he occasionally utilized his experience behind the camera as an assistant director, he ultimately left the film industry completely preferring the peace of a quiet retirement. Casale passed away in Italy on February 4, 2017, at the age of 84 from natural causes. Because of his deeply private nature and his decades-long absence from the screen, his death did not trigger major obituaries in the mainstream press. However, the notable aftermath of his passing saw him widely mourned by a dedicated global network of film historians and spaghetti western fan communities who ensured that the enduring legacy of Bill Carson would be celebrated for generations. Enzo Petito as Storekeeper. Born Vincenzo Squattriti on July 24, 1897 in Naples, Italy, the seasoned stage actor brought his unique presence to the screen in Sergio Leone's iconic 1966 spaghetti western, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. At the age of 68, Petito's portrayal of the feeble and helpless gunsmith storekeeper became a cultural touchstone within the Western genre. Enduring a memorable and tense robbery at the hands of the bandit Tuco, his performance offered a masterful depiction of the beleaguered everyman that was both darkly humorous and unforgettable. For a few brief minutes of screen time, his expressive, terrified reactions to the bandit assembling a custom revolver defined a scene that remains one of cinema's most iconic and suspenseful moments. Despite his character's bumbling, timid, and helpless nature, Enzo Petito was a highly disciplined and esteemed theatrical veteran who came from a prominent dynasty of Neapolitan performing arts royalty. Described by his peers as a dedicated and seasoned professional deeply connected to the Italian stage, he was the polar opposite of the pathetic victim he portrayed on screen. This contrast was a significant part of his professional journey as he found the transition from respected theater performer to minor cinematic side character to be a frustrating reality. His film career was heavily marked by the struggle of being typecast. He was continually pigeonholed into playing eccentric everymen, cobblers, priests, and homeless men. This made it incredibly difficult for him to secure the leading roles that his prestigious theatrical pedigree, being the great-grandson of legendary playwright Antonio Petito, arguably deserved, leaving him relegated to background parts throughout his cinematic tenure. Enzo Petito did not live long enough to see the massive global legacy of his most famous cinematic appearance. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly effectively served as his final film role, capping off a career that spanned decades in the theater, alongside greats like Edoardo De Filippo. Petito passed away in Rome, Italy on July 17, 1967, at the age of 69 from undisclosed causes just months after the film's initial release. His passing received surprisingly modest notice in contemporary Italian entertainment circles, a disheartening close to a storied theatrical life. He was laid to rest at the Cimitero Flaminio in Rome, leaving behind a brief but immortalized cinematic legacy in one of history's greatest films. Antonio Casas as Stevens. Born on November 11, 1911, the A Coruña, Galicia native first brought the doomed farmer Stevens to life in Sergio Leone's 1966 epic The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. At the age of 54, Casas's portrayal of the former Confederate soldier caught in a deadly web of greed became a memorable component of the genre's cultural touchstone, offering a tense and gritty depiction of the American Civil War's brutal aftermath. Though his screen time was brief, his fatal interrogation at the hands of Angel Eyes helped define the ruthless and iconic tone of a film that remains a monumental achievement in cinematic history. Despite Stevens being a tragic, desperate figure entrenched in the violent and treacherous world of the Wild West, Antonio Casas was an energetic, disciplined professional whose real-life persona was grounded and athletic. This contrast was a significant part of his personal journey. Before ever stepping in front of a camera, Casas was a professional footballer for Atletico Madrid, and his transition to the arts only happened because a devastating knee injury shattered his athletic dreams. His acting career was heavily marked by the struggle of being typecast in gritty secondary roles, which made it difficult for him to find prominent work outside the rigid confines of spaghetti westerns and Spanish-language B-movies. The grueling nature of the European genre industry meant he was frequently locked into playing doomed henchmen or weary victims of professional hardship that kept him from achieving the leading man stardom his unwavering dedication arguably deserved. Antonio Casas continued to work extensively in television and film for decades, navigating the changing landscape of European entertainment to build a massive resume of nearly 170 screen credits. He broadened his artistic footprint by taking on roles in acclaimed projects, most notably in Luis Buñuel's 1970 classic Tristana, and enjoyed a steady run in Spanish television throughout the early 1970s before returning entirely to film. He remained a dedicated craftsman who acted right up until his final days. Casas passed away in Madrid, Spain on February 14, 1982, at the age of 70 from natural causes. His death was followed by a discreet period of mourning with the Spanish press, notably lamenting his quiet disappearance from the public eye, laying to rest a resilient talent who formed the backbone of European cinema's golden era. Aldo Sambrell as member of Angel Eyes Gang. Born on February 23, 1931, the Vallecas Madrid native first entered the entertainment world after a brief career as a professional football player in Mexico and Spain. At the age of 35, Sambrell's portrayal of a ruthless, scruffy outlaw in Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly became an essential ingredient of the spaghetti western's cultural impact, offering a gritty depiction of frontier lawlessness that was both tense and highly influential. For decades, his weathered face and menacing glare defined an archetypal figure that remains a staple of European cinema's most iconic genre. Despite his character's violent and cold-blooded nature, Alfredo Sanchez Brel, known professionally as Aldo Sambrell, was an amiable, straightforward, and deeply devoted family man, described by peers as the polar opposite of the ruthless killers he played. This contrast was a significant part of his cinematic journey. He found that his background as an exiled child fleeing the Spanish Civil War fostered a quiet resilience far removed from the unrepentant sadism of his screen alter egos. His career, however, was heavily marked by the struggle of being severely typecast, which made it nearly impossible for him to secure leading heroic roles or break out of the Western and action genres. Confined to playing henchmen, bandits, and secondary heavies, he often faced the professional hardship of being relegated to low-budget B-movies, navigating a crowded European market where his distinctive scruffy demeanor severely limited his creative opportunities. Aldo Sambrell continued to work in international film and television for decades, appearing in over 150 productions and eventually working behind the camera as a director and producer. He enjoyed a long and stable personal life, marrying model and actress Candida Lopez Cano in 1964, with Sergio Leone famously serving as his best man and raising a son who later became a musician. Throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, he took on roles in international epics like The Wind and the Lion, and action films alongside stars like Jackie Chan in Armor of God 2: Operation Condor. His final on-screen appearances occurred in the early 2000s as his prolific acting run wound down. Sambrell passed away at a hospital in Alicante, Spain on July 10, 2010, at the age of 79 from a cerebral infarction following a series of severe strokes. In a fitting and poetic aftermath to his legendary career, his ashes were scattered at Fort Bravo in the Tabernas Desert, the very cinematic frontier where he had cemented his legacy. Antonio Molino Rojo as Captain Harper. Born on September 14, 1926, in Venta de Baños, Palencia, Spain, the prolific actor brought Captain Harper to life in the iconic 1966 film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. At the age of 39, Rojo's portrayal of the humane and ailing Union prison camp commandant became a cultural touchstone within the genre, providing a rare and essential moral counterpoint amidst the film's cynical trio of anti-heroes and villains. His ability to convey profound decency and vulnerability in a relentlessly harsh setting cemented the character as one of the spaghetti western's most memorable and sympathetic figures. Despite the quiet dignity and decency of his most famous character, Antonio Molino Rojo's professional journey was marked by a stark contrast to this sympathetic role. Off-camera, he was an intensely private and unassuming individual, a far cry from the aggressive, ruthless outlaws he was usually hired to portray. His career was deeply impacted by the severe struggle of being typecast. Throughout the golden age of European westerns, he was consistently relegated to playing gritty villainous henchmen or background gang members in low-budget Italian-Spanish co-productions. Breaking out of this bad guy mold proved to be a persistent professional hardship, and despite amassing well over 100 film credits, he found it incredibly difficult to secure prominent leading roles or showcase his broader acting range. Antonio Molino Rojo continued to work steadily in the European film industry until the late 1980s, eventually branching out to produce and even direct features. But he remained a deeply private individual who kept his personal life entirely out of the public eye. Rojo passed away in Barcelona, Spain on November 2, 2011, at the age of 85 from undisclosed causes related to his advanced age. His passing was followed by a unique and touching aftermath. Rather than a massive mainstream media announcement, the news of his death first broke days later on specialized spaghetti western message boards. This quietly sparked a dedicated outpouring of heartfelt tributes from global film enthusiasts honoring him as an essential and legendary pillar of European cinema. We've traveled from the sun-drenched landscapes of 1966 to the present day, witnessing the inevitable march of time on the faces of our heroes. It's a bittersweet reminder of the fleeting nature of life, yet their performances remain as vibrant as ever. If this glimpse into the past moved you, please give this video a like. Which cast member's journey inspired you today? Join the conversation in the comments and subscribe to join our community of classic film lovers.